Apartment owner required to remove uncomfortable painting from balcony until a museum expresses interest in purchasing it. They called it inappropriate before even asking what it meant. They called it political, aggressive, and divisive, but what it really was a portrait of a black boy holding a flower. The sun had barely risen when the email came. Subject line: compliance violation notification, immediate action required. Tariq Lambert blinked at the subject, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and opened the message on his cracked phone screen. The tone was sterile, almost robotic. Dear Mr. Lambert, we have received several complaints regarding the artwork displayed on your balcony, which may be in violation of our community standards under Section 4C, no visual display that may be construed as disturbing, political, or controversial to the general public. Please remove the painting within 72 hours or face a daily fine of $100. He read it again. The painting in question had been up for 5 days. He painted it himself. It was a simple piece, a young black boy with an afro, standing barefoot in the street, gently holding a sunflower. Behind the child, a wall painted with names handwritten, layer after layer, names like George, Brianna, Trayvon, and Tamir. Names people walked past every day. Tariq had titled it "We Still Bloom." It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. There were no slogans. No clenched fists. Just truth, in color and brushstroke. But apparently, the truth was disturbing. He stepped out onto the small third-floor balcony of his modest apartment in a gentrified Atlanta neighborhood, where new residents still clutched their handbags when passing groups of teens. The painting stood against the railing, protected from the elements with a plastic sheet. The child's eyes wide, soft, and searching stared back at him as if waiting for an answer. Down below, a dog barked. A couple jogged past. One of them looked up and frowned when she saw the art. She whispered something to her partner. And there it was again, that subtle, stomach-turning tension. The discomfort some people felt when confronted by a reality they preferred to ignore. Tariq exhaled. He was used to being the only black tenant in the building. He was used to the stares, the forced smiles, the unspoken warnings. But this was different. This was them trying to silence him. Later that afternoon, he met with the HOA board, a panel of 5 white residents dressed in business casual, sitting behind a folding table in the community center like judges at a science fair. The meeting wasn't about understanding. It was a performance. Mr. Lambert, said a woman with horn-rimmed glasses and a tight ponytail, we're not saying you can't express yourself. But your art is emotionally charged. Tariq tilted his head. Is it the flower that bothers you? Or the child holding it? The room went quiet. Another board member, a balding man who always pretended not to see Tariq in the elevator, cleared his throat. We've had multiple residents complain that the painting is a constant reminder of unrest. Unrest, Tariq repeated. Is that what you call history now? This isn't personal, the woman added quickly. It's about harmony. We want the community to feel safe. And you think a portrait of a black child with a flower is making them unsafe? She glanced down at her paperwork, lips pressed. Tariq smiled, but it was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. You know, when I was a kid, my grandmother used to tell me that when people don't want to see something, they call it controversial. That way, they can pretend it's the subject's fault for existing. Another long silence. They gave him 3 days. That night, he posted a picture of the painting on his Instagram, along with a caption. My HOA says this makes people uncomfortable. That's exactly why I painted it. We still bloom even when they try to uproot us. The post went viral. In 24 hours, it had over 300,000 likes. Thousands of comments poured in, some supportive, others cruel. But one comment stood out. Hi Tariq, I'm a curator with the National Museum of African American Art. Would love to speak with you about this piece. Are you open to a conversation? He read it twice, stunned. His hands shook slightly as he clicked her profile. It was real. Verified. Professional. Legitimate. He messaged back. Within days, the story caught the attention of local news. A reporter from WATL9 knocked on his door for an interview. Tarek, nervous but steady, agreed. He stood in front of the painting in a black hoodie, arms crossed. "This isn't just about a canvas," he said. "It's about who gets to define what's acceptable. Who gets to decide what normal looks like in a neighborhood. And what they're really saying is people like me are only welcome if we stay quiet." Back in the HOA meeting room, the board members were scrambling. Their inboxes were flooded. Protesters had begun gathering in the parking lot. Local artists showed up in solidarity, draping their own work across balconies and fences. The building became a gallery of resistance. One night, someone defaced Tarek's door. A red smear of spray paint, "Move out. This isn't Harlem." Tarek stared at it, heart pounding, fists clenched. But instead of cleaning it, he painted around it, turning the letters into a blooming vine, each insult transformed into a petal or leaf. He repurposed their hatred, just like generations before him. 2 days later, the museum offer became official. The National Museum of African American Art wanted to acquire We Still Bloom for a new exhibit on resistance through visual language. They offered Tarek $12,000, the largest sum he'd ever seen tied to his art. He signed the agreement with trembling hands. The HOA tried to backtrack. "We never meant to stifle creative expression," the board claimed in a public letter. "We're proud of the diverse voices in our community." But no one bought it. The damage had been done. Tarek held a farewell event on his balcony the night before the museum courier came to retrieve the painting. Neighbors he'd never spoken to before came by to shake his hand. A local spoken-word artist performed a piece inspired by the portrait. Kids from the complex asked to take selfies in front of it. Tarek watched from his balcony, tears forming. For the first time since moving in, he didn't feel invisible. And for the first time in his life, he felt like his art didn't just speak, it shouted. The day the painting left his balcony, Tarek felt like a piece of himself was being carried away. The museum's courier handled it with white gloves, carefully sliding the canvas into a padded crate, taping the box shut like it contained something sacred. Maybe it did. "I hope they hang it right," Tarek muttered. "You'll be there to make sure," said Melody Chen, the museum curator, who had flown in from DC to accompany the piece herself. She was sharp-eyed, kind, and asked questions like she actually cared about the answers. "We want you to be part of the installation. Voice matters. Context matters." Tarek nodded, still stunned. Just weeks ago, he was wondering if he could afford groceries. Now, a national institution wanted his name on a wall. The night after the painting was picked up, he couldn't sleep. He sat alone on the balcony, where the easel still stood, naked without the canvas. The breeze was soft. Crickets chirped. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor was laughing too loud at a show. He looked out over the courtyard and realized something had changed. There were more plants on the balconies now. More color. Another neighbor, a black woman on the second floor, had hung a quilt with bright red squares and bold yellow stitching. Across from her, someone had strung up paper lanterns. The building didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a place people were starting to live in, not just hide inside. But the HOA wasn't done. The board called another emergency meeting, this time with legal representation. The complaints had shifted tone. Now they weren't accusing Tarek of violating rules, they were accusing him of endangering the peace. They cited the protests, the media attention, the visitors who made others uncomfortable. They couldn't kick him out for painting. But they could make life hell. Tarek received a formal warning about non-compliance with building etiquette. His rent increased mysteriously by $200. Suddenly, his parking spot was always taken. Packages went missing. Someone slipped a fake noise complaint under his door with no name attached. He documented everything. Layla, a neighbor who had introduced herself at the farewell balcony event, offered to help. She was a law student and knew how to track HOA violations. "They think if they can't silence your painting, they'll just silence you," she said, combing through his lease and HOA bylaws late one night. "You ever feel like winning something just means they aim bigger next time?" "All the time," she said. "But that doesn't mean you stop." At the museum in D.C., the painting's debut was scheduled for the exhibit American Soil, Art That Grew in the Shadows. Tarek flew out on a donated ticket. When he walked into the gallery and saw his work hanging on the pristine white wall, perfectly lit with a small brass plaque underneath. "We Still Bloom, Tarek Lambert, 2024. He stopped breathing for a second. Visitors moved slowly past the painting, some pausing to take it in, others closing their eyes for a moment before moving on. A little girl looked up and said, "He looks like my cousin." Her mom nodded. "He looks like my brother, too." The curator took the mic at the opening ceremony and waved him forward. "Tarek," she said, "created more than art. He created resistance. And resistance, when done with truth and beauty, is unforgettable." He was asked to say a few words. He hadn't prepared a speech. He stood in front of the crowd, hands in his pockets, nerves chewing through him. But then he looked at the painting and remembered why he did it in the first place. "I never thought I'd be here," he began. "I never went to art school. I never had a gallery. I was just trying to be seen. Just trying to remind people that black children bloom too, even in soil cracked with grief." He looked up at the room. "When they said my painting made people uncomfortable, I realized that's exactly what it was supposed to do. We live in a world where comfort depends on silence. But this painting, it was my way of refusing to be quiet. And now it belongs to more than just me." Applause thundered through the room. Tarek stepped down, heart pounding, feeling taller than he had in years. Back in Atlanta, the harassment escalated. A rock was thrown at his window. It missed. Someone scratched his car with a key, leaving a jagged S-shaped scar across the hood. He filed police reports, but nothing came of it. The HOA denied involvement. Still, Tarek didn't move. Instead, he painted again. He started a new piece larger this time. A black mother with gray braids kneeling in a garden of broken bricks, planting seeds with one hand and shielding her child with the other. He called it Still We, so it wasn't subtle. He wasn't trying to be. He didn't hang it on his balcony. He hung it on the side of the building. With Lila's help, he filed for temporary installation approval through a city arts initiative. The city approved it. The HOA went ballistic. A cease and desist letter arrived 3 days later. But it was too late. The mural had already been seen. Photographed. Shared. Praised. A local black-owned bookstore offered him a grant. A non-profit reached out to commission community-based murals around underserved schools. Tarek found himself at the center of something far bigger than his apartment complex. This wasn't just about his art anymore. This was about visibility. This was about the right to exist out loud. Then came the documentary offer. A small film crew had been following his story. They pitched it to PBS and got greenlit. Still Blooming, The Art of Resistance premiered the following spring. It wasn't flashy. It was raw. Real. It showed Tarek painting late into the night. It showed the HOA letters. It showed him on the museum steps, blinking under the weight of applause. It showed him walking down cracked sidewalks, carrying his easel like a banner. And it ended with his voice. "They tried to make me take down a painting. But what they really did was give me a reason to paint more." When the documentary aired, donations flooded into youth art programs across Atlanta. 3 schools asked him to teach workshops. A teacher at one of the private schools that had once called his painting too controversial invited him to speak to students. He said yes. He walked into their auditorium in jeans and paint-stained shoes. A few of the teachers flinched. The students leaned in. He talked about the power of telling your story even when your voice shakes. He talked about what it meant to paint your own truth on a wall no one wanted to look at. And how sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not erase yourself when asked. A girl in the front row asked him what he would paint next. He smiled. Something you haven't seen before. But something you've always felt. By the following summer, everything had changed except for the building. The HOA still sent out monthly newsletters lined with passive-aggressive reminders, no excessive decoration. No loitering on balconies. No displays that attract outside attention. But few people listened anymore. Tariq's resistance had rippled outward. Now kids skated in the courtyard. Neighbors chatted over railings. Where before the building had been a silent block of stacked, suspicious lives, now it felt like a neighborhood. The mural on the side of the building remained. Despite legal challenges from the HOA, the city ruled that the wall was public-facing and eligible for temporary cultural expression under a new civic beautification program. Tariq's work had, unintentionally, helped revise a local ordinance. He laughed when he read the ruling. All because he painted a boy with a flower. He was now being asked to paint 4 more murals around Atlanta. He was also broke. The grants helped, but they didn't last. Teaching workshops covered groceries, but barely. His landlord raised the rent again. The museum money had gone to legal fees, materials, and a small emergency fund for young artists he quietly funded. He never wanted fame. He wanted change. But fame had come knocking, and change was stubbornly slow. One night, a knock came at his apartment door. It was Officer DeWitt, the same building security officer who had once ignored him, who had never returned a good morning until Tariq was in the news. Tonight, though, his face was different. He held something in his hands, a small box. "Thought you might want this," he said gruffly. "It was found under your car." Tariq opened the box slowly. Inside was a broken piece of wood. Splintered. The kind artists used to stretch and frame their canvas. He knew what it was instantly. It was the stretcher bar from We Still Bloom. Somehow, something had snapped during shipment or framing, and instead of throwing it away, someone at the museum had saved it. Attached to it was a handwritten note. "Even broken frames carry weight. Thank you for what you held together. MC, Ma." Tariq held the piece of wood in his hand, silent. It wasn't worth anything, not really. But to him, it felt heavier than gold. The next morning, he built a new canvas, this time the largest one yet. He stretched it tight over a recycled frame, stapled it firm, and wheeled it out to the empty fence that lined the construction site across from the building. He didn't ask for permission. He just painted. 5 days in the sun. 10 layers of brush and sweat. No cameras. No posts. The image was haunting and beautiful, an elderly black woman with a scarred face, sitting calmly on a stoop, surrounded by blooming dandelions growing out of concrete. Above her, carved into the brick wall behind her, were hundreds of faint names, not of martyrs this time, but of artists. Singers. Poets. Grandmothers who raised generations on stories. He called it "We Remember Ourselves." People gathered. No one tried to stop him. The HOA didn't send an email. Something had shifted, not just in the bylaws, but in the spirit of the place. A few weeks later, he was invited to attend a ceremony at City Hall. The mayor awarded him a Civic Arts Impact Medal, the youngest artist to receive it. The speech was short and formal, but sincere. Afterward, the mayor shook his hand and said, your paintings don't just speak, they stay. Tarek smiled and said, that's the point. The award was nice. But it was what happened after that mattered more. A woman in a tan sweater approached him in the lobby. Her eyes were wide with emotion. You don't remember me, she said. But I wrote the original HOA complaint. Tarek froze. She looked down, ashamed. I'm not proud of it. I was scared. I told myself I was doing it for the sake of the neighborhood. But really, I just didn't want to confront what I knew was true. He didn't say anything. I came here to apologize, she whispered. But also to say thank you. You made me see what I didn't want to. He finally nodded. Then keep looking, he said gently. There's more to see. That night, he walked back through his neighborhood alone. Past the same doors that once closed tightly when he walked by. Now a few were left open. He saw one older white couple drinking tea on their balcony. They raised their cups to him without irony. A Latino father pushed his daughter on a swing in the corner garden. Someone blasted jazz through an open window. And there, in the alley where someone once scrawled hate on his door, kids were spray painting their own mural, wild with color, uneven but bold. He didn't stop them. He just watched. A few months later, We Still Bloom was selected as the centerpiece of a traveling exhibition titled The American Gaze, What We Refuse to See. Tarek was flown out to New York, Chicago, San Francisco. Every city had its own echo artists emerging, stories being told, balconies reclaiming their voice. At every stop, people asked him the same thing. What gave you the courage to paint it? And he always answered the same way. Silence gave me no other choice. Eventually, he moved. Not because he was chased out, but because he had outgrown the space. He moved into a shared warehouse studio on the east side with other artists, mostly black, mostly broke, mostly brilliant. Together, they painted murals across the city. On abandoned buildings. On forgotten bridges. On walls people used to pretend weren't there. One wall, across from a once notorious juvenile detention center, became their largest canvas. They painted children. Not victims. Not statistics. Children laughing. Running. Jumping rope. One boy held a flower. Underneath, in hand-painted text, were the words. We are still here. Still growing. Still blooming. Tarek stood back on the final day, brush still wet, and let the sun bake the colors in. People drove by and honked. Kids pointed from school buses. And somewhere deep inside him, a piece of silence cracked open and something better bloomed in its place. He never stopped painting. And the world, slowly, started listening.